information about your background, your education, and some of your experiences.
Yes.
And then during the second period, we will have an opportunity to get into the reconstruction, reparations, and reclamation
Yes,
of African Americans.
Thank you, Dr. Haney, and I'm delighted to be back. And as I was saying first, I must acknowledge the President of the country, President Donald J. Trump, as well as the governor of this state. And I never met either one of them, but this morning when I left my apartment, there was a young man at the door down in the hall, and he was knocking on the door, and the man come out, and he said, you on time. And what was so intriguing about it, he worked with the Lee Company. He was a plumber. So we got on the elevator together, and I discovered those things about him. I let him know I was a plumber too, coming from a plumbing background. But I'm saying all that to say, I've met this governor through his work and how he's named in the country, in this state, in this kind of thing, how he's recognized, and I appreciate all of that. And the other thing here is I am an ambassador for the Civilian Conservation Corps. My father was one, I'm one today. The men in the Conservation Corps were credited with General George C. Marshall at their training with what won World War II. And I am honored to know that my father was among those men. And so we are carrying these things on. It's like a totem pole. And here in Nashville, I am a member of the Corinthian Church with Reverend Enoch Fuzz. And he used to introduce me when he was on the radio and I was in Atlanta and this type of thing. And the reason I'm expressing all of these individuals, to me, this is a form of reclamation. I am mentioning others who have made the way for me to be here today. So it is in order for me to mention them in the ways in which I have, leading up to saying the things that I come to share with today.
Very good.
Yes.
Very good. And so let's make some statements during the next minute and a half in reference to background, education, that kind of thing. Sort of summarize that up
Yes,
for us.
sir.
And then we'll go into this second segment talking about the 3 R's.
Yes.
That we're talking about.
Well, my background in education, I am a graduate of Selma University. I went to Tuscaloosa County High School in Northport, Alabama, Matthews Elementary, and went to kindergarten where I quit. I was afraid of the teacher's voice, so I quit kindergarten. My mother let me quit kindergarten. And during that time, I began to think of ways in order to try to educate myself. And then when you grow up and you come from a very protected family, you've given a lot, you begin to become dependent on those things, and you don't spend a lot of time developing the skills necessary to help yourself, in this kind of thing. So that's basically, it sums up my education. Had a lot of toys. Most of the guys that I grew up with in my hometown, they remember my toys to this day, because we put the kind of thought into selecting them.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, and so what we'll do, we'll take our first commercial break,
Okay.
and then we'll come back and we'll deal with reconstruction, reparations, and reclamation. And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
It's 8 minutes, okay.
And so what we want to do is to talk about Reconstruction, the Reconstruction period in American history.
Yes.
And reclamation, reparations, pay us. And then finally, your idea of reclamation.
Okay.
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 Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Minister Taylor, and he's giving us some information in reference to what might be called the 3 R's in the African American social and economic experience, and that is Reconstruction, the period immediately after the war, and reparations, which is to say that Africans wanted to be paid for the work that they had performed during the war, and of course, reclamation. And I think that this is something that you've added to the R's, and we'll have you give an explanation as well as a discussion in reference to it. But let's talk about it from that perspective.
And Dr. Haney, the way this happened, last week I think there was a special on recollection by Henry Louis Gates, and I didn't get a chance to see it. But what I did do, I went to the encyclopedia to take a look at the Reconstruction period. And this just happened last week. And I discovered the Bureau of Reclamation. And so that really incited me, because I have written President Trump several times, and I have asked for a kind of a tax, a MLK Reclamation Tax Fund. And this is designed to speak to all of the African Americans who have profited from the MLK Civil Rights Movement. Now, my life is the best one to show how the side effects of the Civil Rights Movement has never been addressed, Dr. Haney. Though African Americans who have profited from it, they don't have a memory of not profiting from it. But see, I have that memory, and in my hometown of Selma, at Selma University, Dr. C.C. Vivian, he told me that when they left Selma in the 60s, they didn't look back. A lot of places that they've been and were in these cities, and I have done the research. My life is a counter-narrative of that period, and it's the best life, I believe, to break down, to show how the wealthy blacks who have profited from the Civil Rights Movement should be the ones to contribute to the reclamation fund, tax fund. And see, it's like a domino effect, Dr. Haney. You go back to Reconstruction, and then we had the Civil Rights Movement, then you go back to Reconstruction. But see, the ones who've been in the Civil Rights Movement, they have never taken the time out to see the damage left there. And take, for instance, the book by Eddie Taylor in Chicago called Restoring the Mind of Black America. He explains how when the Malcolm X life came to an end, MLK and the Black Panthers, he explained how their lives were not properly mourned, and it has spiraled down into poverty, lack of education, teenage pregnancy, and all of these things. So I can't look over those things, directly into the Civil Rights era and then going back to Reconstruction, because I think reclamation, and like you take coal out of the ground, you're supposed to put something back in. And as I've said before, I know how to show the African Americans what it is that has been taken out of our community. The music, when they rewrote the old songs of the church, which Du Bois say is the greatest gift that the Negro has given to America. And on the radio in Chicago last Monday on the Mark Wallace show, he expressed that he asked his mother, was she listening to MLK speeches when she was pregnant with him? And she told him that she was. So what am I saying, Dr. Haney? The children who were before the movement and who were in prenatal, they have been preconditioned because his voice is embryonic. It has affected them in that period. So once they are born, they are prepared for Congressman John Lewis to take them into the movement or this kind of thing. So I'm just saying I have to get this out because, see, my father lost everything as a result of the movement. So that's
well, now, in a real sense, if you're going to talk about the Reconstruction,
yeah, yes, sir.
What you have to do is to understand what this did in terms of liberating some 4.5 million Africans from slavery. And so that's important.
Yes.
And then to recognize that after they are liberated, they are without any kind of resources in a real sense. It was against the law for Africans to own property, to be married, and all of these restrictions.
That's right.
But Reconstruction allowed Africans to receive the most important thing, and that is what? The 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which gave black folks freedom.
Yes.
The 14th Amendment to the Constitution,
that's right,
which also gave Africans the right to vote, to make them human.
That's right.
So these are what we call the Human Rights Amendments.
That's right.
And of course the 15th Amendment, which is the right to vote.
Yes.
Now these were three important things that came to the African population during the period immediately after slavery.
That's right.
But I think one of the greatest challenges was the idea of repayment That is, Africans should be paid for the 400 years of slavery that they endured.
Yes.
Now, of course, nobody's talking about coming out and giving everybody $20 an hour for a long period of time. No, which is to say that, you know, and not to make light of it,
yes.
but what we're saying here is that it is not necessary to talk about any kind of financial compensation in terms of giving everybody $2 or whatever, et cetera.
Okay, yes.
But it is important to recognize that because of slavery, there were things that were done that inhibited Africans from making the kind of progress that others were able to make. And that is what people mean for the most part when they talk about reparations,
yes,
you
sir.
see, and not any kind of financial thing.
Right.
But I think that people have come up across the nation dealing with all kinds of ideas as to how this idea of reparation should be recognized.
Yes.
And of course, there are many different ideas.
And Dr. Haney, as you were saying, and as I was saying, my life is the best one to show how reclamations, and then it's like a domino. You have reclamation, then you have reparation, then you have the reconstruction. I'm thinking now in moving back, not back there. I can't go back there, but I'm just 64 years old. But I remember the civil rights movement. I remember in the 3rd grade when it came to Tuscaloosa, how it disturbed the family in the midst of the development of interpersonal communication. My father worked at Ryco Chemical. My mother was a homemaker. And he had to leave work because one of his sisters was on her way to Stillman College. But the point that we are pointing out here is simply this, that the reclamation takes in account, for example, the National Pirate newspaper said after 50 years, there was something that was going on there that had not been addressed in terms of reclamation.
Okay, and so what we'll do, we'll take our first commercial break.
Okay.
And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Segment. The second. No, this is the second segment.
This is the third.
Yes, the 3rd.
Is this the third segment?
Yeah. This is your last one.
I guess I've been sitting here too long today because I was thinking that this was the end of.
Well, he did the talking, most of the talking.
But we all.
I understand.
Well, I had to keep you on the right road.
That's right, and you're the historian.
Well, I had to keep you on the right road. In
That's
time,
right.
at least. Okay, so
But it was helpful. You know, you were able to help me to see back in that period. So I can't go back there, you know, and address that. But I can meet you over this way coming up. Yeah.
All right, stand by, Dr. Haney. Last segment.
thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Minister Taylor, and the topic is the 3 R's of the African American experience following the Civil War. And I think, Professor Taylor, we've already indicated that one of those experiences was the Reconstruction, the end of the war itself that liberated Africans. And I think we indicated that they were given the 13th Amendment, that slavery ended, the 14th Amendment, the right of citizenship, and the 15th Amendment, the vote.
That's right.
And many people have considered this to be important in terms of the African experience in America.
Yes.
And I think that some have also added, and I think that you've added a 3rd R to it.
That's right.
And you call this reclamation.
That's correct.
And I think that that's important.
Yes.
So we'll give you an opportunity
Okay.
now to
Okay.
evaluate that.
Okay, and Dr. Haney, in reference to reclamation, see, learning to protest and march and all these things, that affected the interpersonal communications in the African American community across the board. And in Selma, when the Civil Rights Movement left Selma, Dr. L. Wilkins, PhD, wrote that it left a schism a lack of spiritualness, a moral decay, and a confusion that affected the families, the schools, and the churches. And one of my mentors, you say, in Atlanta, Dr. Andrew Harrison, he's a judge. He's also a general in the military, in the Army, and he was in the Atlanta traffic court. And he said, when we get in these spaces, we have to deliver. And this is what I'm trying to do, because this has to do with our kids' ability to learn. When I was in the school system, I would ask the kids, I said, why do you make so many sounds that have no meaning? And things of this nature. So, but in the area of the civil rights era, their kids have been affected in their ability to concentrate. And these things they have not been able to put into words. And when the civil rights movement left Selma, Dr. Turner J.L. Chestnut, Auntie said, it took the kids a whole year to learn how to concentrate in the classroom again.
Now, in a real sense, Minister Taylor, the idea of reclamation, as you're explaining it
Yes.
now, talk about it within the terms of how it fits into the idea of reconstruction, reparations, and reclamation.
That's right, okay.
Reclaim, what are Africans trying to reclaim?
Okay, right now, English is like our second language. Most of us think of Swahili or something like that. But right now, we're just trying to learn how to talk and say what we need to talk about that's happening now. And you got all these recordings in black radio. They don't do nothing but play music. You know, I have been trying to get several of them to take 2 or 3 minutes out to explain to the kids encoding, decoding, giving feedback. And when a person is interference prone, they don't even take out the time to do that. You take right now at the Sunday School Publishing Board, the director there of the Sunday School Publishing Board, he's in my debt for $865. We're trying to keep Dr. J. Robert Bradley's legacy alive. His name is in granite down there on the court of 3 stars. The CCC there is also, those are some old men, and it's about maybe 50 of them that is left. The insensitivity of the grandchildren of MLK, these civil rights babies, they are destroying our country. And so this is about the country today for me.
I think that's a point of view.
Yes.
But in terms of reclamation,
yes, sir.
you see, that is, and I thought that your idea was that this is to what? Reclaim.
It is to I start here. The letters that I'm receiving from the president, it's making mentions of restoring the rule of law, and also the restoring the spirit of our nation. Dr. Bradley is the best singer, one of the best singers when it comes to that. He was the favorite singer of MLK. And then you have the restoring the rule of law. And I've even asked the president to use my family to help restore the rule of law in America.
Let's talk about your family in reference to that.
Okay.
Because now, reclamation, when you speak of reclamation,
yes.
How do you place your family within, I mean, what has your family to reclaim?
Well, that's an excellent question there, Dr. Haney. See, I come out of a medical family. I've been to medical school at Emory, Georgia Tech, and Morehouse School of Medicine. I know what the problem is when it comes to communications in the medical profession. All of this is reclamation being reconnected. If you had 2 students who one was medical graduate BA in English and one was BS in biology, and they wanted to go to medical school, they would accept the one with the BA in English. Why? Because the communications in the medical profession is very bad. You also have hearing loss. I work with Mr. David, what's his name? David, I can't think of his name, but he's with the Let My People Hear organization. It has to do with hearing loss. You have so many different things that are affecting us, and that's why.
Do you feel that that there's quite a bit of misinformation in reference to what people are receiving, or what? I mean, oftentimes you make statements in reference to that people are not receiving the proper kind of information. What kind of information do you believe that people should receive?
Well, one of the main things, and I've heard Bill Cosby say this, that one of the best things that parents can give their children is to see the mother and father see them talking to each other. I didn't get interpersonal communication skills coming up out of my family. I got them by living in the families of other educators as I was acquiring my education. Dr. Wilson Fallon in Birmingham at the Birmingham Baptist College, he was one who I had the opportunity to live in his home, and he told me whenever I was in Birmingham, I had somewhere to stay. But having the opportunity to just experience that home environment has just been so important. And then you have the interpersonal communication skills. Black radio, they give the impression on the air that they are omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent because of the airtime that they have. But most of them are verbally illiterate. I have been put off 8 radio stations. Why? Because they don't want the people to hear this. Down in Tuscaloosa, WQDZ and WJLD, they're the longest running. They've been on the air since about the end of 45, the war.
Now, does that play into anything in reference to reclamation? I mean, how do you reclaim something that has never been in a real sense?
That's an excellent question, Mr. Dr. Haney. Both of those radio owners was in Birmingham with the Bull Connor and them dogs. And I tell some people that if you put them radio station in a dog pound down in Birmingham, them dogs will bark all day and they'll howl all night because they think they're still back in the civil rights movement. It is those vocals of those radio hosts, it echoes something when they get on the air, that they know how to use it against their own people. And in the reclamation, they also, reconstructing period, they also had law enforcement officers in order to protect the rights of the people. Today, we need someone to help protect blacks of their rights from these wealthy ones.
Well, I mean, I think that's the point of view.
Oh, well, let me give you another angle on it. I come out of a family where Munchausen syndrome by proxy is 90 years old. I've had a cousin to contact the police department here in Nashville and say I was texting the courts and churches in Birmingham, in Alabama, Tuscaloosa, to shoot them up. I don't even know how to text. Now there's been an officer who has started to investigate. That's Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And when I first moved here and
what do you call that?
Munchausen syndrome by proxy is where a person will concoct things around someone else and get others to believe it, and it's not true. And when I first moved here and met Chief Anderson, I asked him, had he ever dealt with it, and he said yes. And that made me...
Well, he understood exactly what you were talking about.
Yes, and that made me comfortable because I've been mentored by the same FBI agent that trained his officers. He mentored me in Atlanta because of the family that I come out of, and my sister, who went to Tennessee State University, named Loretta Johnson, she was on probation as a nurse in Atlanta. She was doing things as a nurse she was not supposed to be doing. So all of these things have got to be brought out. And she was one who was so in love with MLK that she manipulated the family.
Well, see, the thing about it, I think that you mentioned MLK.
Yes.
Oftentimes in reference to this.
Yeah, I do. Because I have chronicled how my life is a counter-narrative of his. And when Dr. Baldwin was here...
When you say that your life is a counter-narrative of the life of Dr. MLK.
Yes.
Explain what that means. Well, of course, I don't think we have time. I think we'll have to have.
I didn't want to take long.
About 17 seconds.
I could do it.
No, don't try to do it in 17
Let me do it, Dr. Haney. It's important.
And of course, we're going to have to end.
Okay.
And of course, we're going to thank our audience. And of course, let me encourage you to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.